Hello and welcome to Stories and Lessons. My name is Amy Ebert, and I'm your host for today's podcast.
My name is Brad Ebert. I'm your co-host.
Welcome back to the show. Today we're honored to have Jonathan Little joining us, a true titan on the felt and a great ambassador for the game of poker. With 2 recent victories at the Poker Go Cup in Las Vegas, he continues to build his legacy and career earnings. When he's not crushing tournaments, he's guiding countless poker enthusiasts on their journeys to success with his online coaching platform, pokercoaching.com, and his numerous books. To get your free 3-hour intro course from Jonathan, go to pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. Welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. That's a great introduction.
We're honored to have you here with us, Jonathan. If you could, please share with our audience a little bit about your upbringing and experience as a child growing up in Pensacola, Florida.
And growing up in Pensacola was, in my mind, normal. Just like most people's hometown is probably normal, and it becomes home, and you certainly have nostalgia for those things. But as a kid, I always played a lot of games. My dad taught me how to play chess when I was 5 or 6 years old, and then I could beat him a year later. And then I did pretty good at chess up until middle school. Then I found a card game called Magic the Gathering, which is kind of like a mix between chess and poker. That also teaches finance and strategy. It's a it's a good game. And I got very good at that. I played that a lot as a kid, and then I eventually found poker. So growing up was a lot of games, and that was it.
Yeah, I did come across, I saw that you were 9th in the world at one point in Magic. Is that accurate?
There are various formats of Magic the Gathering. I played a rather niche format, and I got really good at that one. And I still like it today. I still play a little bit on the side for fun.
Yeah, I know, like
So
20
did
years
your
ago,
parents think you were going to
everybody
be
was
like the
playing.
next Bobby Fischer or anything?
I don't know what my parents thought. They did not like that I spent so much time on Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering is a tough game because they're always adding new cards to the pool of cards available to play with every 3 months or so. And that forces you to learn a lot if you want to be very, very good. You essentially have to know what everything does and how everything interacts. And that takes a lot of effort and work. And seems crazy as a kid to sit there and memorize cards all day, but it was fun and enjoyable and part of the game that I liked. And learning how all the pieces interact is pretty cool. Kind of like in chess, you learn how some pieces interact well with others, and you can see many moves ahead. And in most games, you can see many moves ahead if you learn what everything does and how everything interacts.
So this
And it
obviously
gives you a big edge.
This prepared you for poker, obviously, because you have to constantly adjust. There's new cards in the pool. It's the same with poker, where every game, you obviously are going to have to change your strategies based on the table, the strength of the table.
Yeah, you certainly have to change your strategy at poker based on who you are playing against. If your opponents are really, really great at poker, your job is to just play as close to a perfect computer playing robot as you can, and they're going to do roughly the same, and you're roughly going to break even against each other. But against weaker players, you want to figure out what they're doing incorrectly. And this is the case with all games. If you know in chess, someone just doesn't know how to play on the queen side at all, for whatever reason, they're just bad at it, then you just attack that side and you'll crush them. And in poker, you can figure out some people, let's say they don't raise on the flop often enough. And that allows you to make logical adjustments, like bet way more often on the flop, because you're not going to get raised off of your hand. So you're always trying to figure out what your opponents do incorrectly in all games, and then you want to exploit them until they adjust. Because if you think they do something, but they actually are not doing that thing, then they'll crush you. So it's kind of a cat and mouse game against recreational players to some extent, trying to figure out what they do incorrectly. But a lot of people just have default strategies in their head that they blindly follow and they don't really adjust from. And that allows you to take advantage of their mistakes over and over and over again.
Do you experience a lot of metagame situations when you're playing the higher stakes, or is everyone just trying to play fundamental poker for the most part?
At the highest stakes games, you're usually playing with something like 85% very, very good players, and then maybe 15% recreational players who are not necessarily terrible, but they're not world class, right? And against the 85% very good players, you're just trying to play good, strong, fundamentally sound poker. Some players don't necessarily do that. They think that everyone in general makes specific mistakes and they adjust as they would do if everybody were making specific mistakes. For example, a lot of people don't check raise all in on the river as a bluff often enough. They don't want to risk their stack with nothing. So if you get check raised all in on the river, you should be folding more often than a perfect computer would tell you to do, because it presumes your opponent's going to bluff adequately. So you're always making some adjustments like that, even against the best players, because it's hard to play good, strong, fundamentally sound poker. It's hard to find the right bluffs in a lot of scenarios, especially for all of your chips. But against the weaker players, you're definitely trying to play more pots with them and get involved with them, because even if you don't necessarily know what they're doing correctly, if you play well and they do not play well, you're going to make money in the long run.
So after you were into Magic the Gathering, how did you fall into poker? How did that happen for you?
One day after a Magic the Gathering tournament, we would usually play another Magic tournament. We would play one tournament, then get done with that, then play another one until 5 a.m. It was crazy, crazy stuff. And so one day, instead of playing another Magic tournament, someone said, why don't we play a $1 buy-in poker tournament with the 9 of us? We'll sit, we'll play, and the winner will get the $9. And we did that for a few months. I quickly realized that that was a skill game and not a luck game. And I used all of my spare money to buy some poker books. I studied poker, studied all the books I could find. I put $50 into an online poker site, and then started grinding that up.
Where were you playing on Party Poker? Which sites were you playing on back then?
It was Party Poker back then in 2003. That was the main site, and Party Poker was good. Back then, they did not really have much no-limit hold'em. They only had limit hold'em, which is an antiquated game now. No one really plays it all that much. And I got really good at limit hold'em because that was the game that you had to play. But eventually, no limit hold'em became more popular, and I transitioned to mostly 9-handed no limit hold'em tournaments because you could play a lot of them in a short period of time.
Yeah, a lot of sit and goes.
Yeah, I played a ton of sit and goes because that allowed you to realize your edge. Poker has a lot of variance in it, especially in a tournament. I mean, take the World Series of Poker main event. Every year they have a $10,000 buy-in tournament that has 10,000 or so players in it. Even if you're the best player in the world, you may win it one in 3,000 or something like that. Yeah. So you got to play it 3,000 times to get a win, which obviously isn't going to happen because you only get to play about
one of the best.
We don't have enough years to get there. Yeah.
Right. You only get to play 50 of them in your life, right?
Yeah.
So you're probably not going to win. You're probably not going to final table. I mean, you could, and if you do, you're going to get a disproportionate reward compared to the buy-in you're investing. But there's a lot of variance. Whereas in a 9-person tournament, there's relatively little variance, especially if you play a lot of them. And back then, I would play 3,000 or 4,000 of those a month, and that lets you know very clearly if you're winning or losing, which is good. I like to know if I'm winning or losing within reason.
What was a good ROI for that time period regarding sit and go tournament?
I was playing like $1,000 buy-in sit and goes to $200 buy-in sit and goes. So the higher ones that ran back then. Yeah, your return on investment, a very good ROI would be 10% or so.
10%.
And eventually, Party Poker closed to Americans, and then all the players there went to play on PokerStars, who were good, but a lot of the recreational players did not. So that made the games much tougher. And then a good return on investment would be 5% or 2%.
Sure.
And the game essentially died. And that forced me to move to multi-table tournaments like you see on TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you're playing like the $10 to $200 range, your ROI, I know a lot of people have really high ROIs in that.
Well, yeah, as your opponents are substantially worse, you can have a much bigger edge.
Because they didn't call wide enough. You know, that's one thing I noticed. You're pushing 12 big blinds. They're only calling with like the top. I mean, they're calling King Jack, Ace Jack. They're not calling light ever. And now when I'm playing sit and goes today, even just jumping on WSOP, I noticed that I'm pushing too wide. I looked at my stat. People are calling me lighter. So I realized I can't play the same way I played 20 years ago, obviously, because players have adjusted a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you go all in too often and they call at the game theory optimal frequency, you're just going to lose. And if they recognize you're shoving all in too wide and they call even wider, then you're really going to lose. So that kind of forces you just to play good, strong, fundamentally sound poker, at least know what that looks like.
When did you shift to you're playing poker full time? Things change in your life. You get married, you have children, and then at some point in there you bring in the coaching. Was that before? Was that after the family? When would that shift occur where you started having the poker coaching as part of your income as well?
So I always taught people how to play poker just for fun. There were various online poker forums that existed a long time ago. People don't really post on them so much anymore. But people would discuss poker, and I would be in there discussing poker with other people and trying to get good. And we had a single table tournament forum where everybody posted about sit and goes. And I guess my posts were good, and people wanted to learn from me. They would come to me for private coaching, and whenever I would coach anyone, or whenever they'd ask me a question, I would usually just write an article about it and send it to them. That way I could have it for the next person. That way I don't have to re-say the same thing. This was before there were any poker training sites or anything like that where there were videos of everything. And so I would be sharing the various articles, and we eventually decided, me and a few friends decided to make a training site only for sit and goes. And that was probably a mistake in hindsight because it made people very good at sit and goes very quickly, and it further helped kill the games. So that was just for fun. And I always had a training site to some extent, although I wasn't really taking it seriously up until about 10 years ago when I knew I wanted to settle down and have a family, and traveling 3 weeks out of the month is not so good for having a family. So I figured I might as well take this halfway decent training site I have and substantially ramp it up and devote a lot of attention to it. And that's what I did. About 10 years ago, we changed the name to pokercoaching.com. We moved from only tournaments to cash games as well, and a few other forms of poker. And it's going well. Everything is going great.
You had your 500th weekly poker hand recently, correct? So I was happened to come across that. So that's what spans 9.5 years ago if you did it every week.
Yeah, believe it or not, there was actually another 6 years before that. A slightly different iteration. So yeah, I've been at the poker content creation game for a long time. I don't know if people know Twitch. Twitch is the place where you can stream games. They actually banned me for trying to stream poker on Twitch a long time ago. And then a month later, another player came along and streamed poker, and they said, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" And then they promoted him and made him famous. They banned me. They made him famous. Such is life.
Who was that?
This was a guy, Jason Somerville. I don't even know if he's doing much poker anymore, but he was by far the most popular streamer for a while. And he came along a few months after me, and they loved it. But they said, "Oh my God, gambling, no." I'm like, whatever, fine.
Timing.
Yeah, they unbanned me though. It's okay. We have a good relationship.
Okay. You're back in.
Yes.
So I'd like to hear how, I know that I read something that you built up your bankroll, was it to 350,000 roughly? And I think you took your shot at the WSOP.
Yeah, well, I started with the $50 when I was 18, and I just played a ton of limit hold'em, and then eventually I transitioned to the sit and goes. And by the time I was 21, the $50 had become about 350,000, which is a good run up. And I did it in a way that didn't really require a whole lot of luck, which is good. What happens to a lot of people is they win a tournament for, let's say they buy in for $10 and they win a tournament for $5,000. They get lucky, right?
Yeah.
And they take that $5,000, they turn that $5,000 into $100,000 by spiking some other tournament. They think, "Oh my God, I'm the best player ever." Whereas in reality, they probably just had one of those 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 runs that, there's a bunch of people trying, someone's going to spike it, right? And they get very overly confident. Whereas all of my winnings pretty much came from sit and goes, where it's very clear it's not luck based over 100,000 sit and goes. It's just not. Right?
Yeah.
So that's good. It made it very clear to me that I was a winning player in those games. But then I went to play live tournaments, and those have a very different structure than nine-handed sit and goes. So in a nine-handed sit and go, you're trying to get in the top 30% of the field or 33% of the field. Whereas in a tournament that you see online or that's taking place in most casinos, the goal is kind of to get in the top 1 or 2% of the field. And that requires a very different strategy because in a tournament at a casino, most of the money goes to the first, second, and third place players. So you have to gamble a whole lot more to some extent. And, gamble in quotation marks. It takes a different strategy. And I used a incorrect strategy for the first 6 months or so of my live poker career, and I ended up losing about 100-something thousand of it back just playing in games where I was playing poorly. And that's good, though. It teaches you. It makes you learn. And I was not hard-headed and thought I knew what I was doing because I've had success in some other format. I found a lot of good players. I learned from them and continued doing my best.
Yeah,
a lot of people who have success in poker have this issue where they think because they're good at one form of poker that they must be good at all forms of poker and also all things. And that's just not true. Just because you're good at one thing. Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean,
interesting.
Look at Twitter, look at social media. Everyone thinks they have an opinion about everything and that their opinion matters. But they're not experts, they're not professionals. And they're confident because they have been successful at something, right? Like me with nine-handed sit and goes. I thought, I can go play tournaments, no problem. But that's just dumb. And it's important to recognize that just because you are really good at something doesn't mean you're good at even things that look similar but are actually different.
Oh, very.
And that was a good lesson I learned when I was a young kid.
Were you like min cashing a lot, just not accumulating enough chips to like do damage, to win the tournament, or what do you think was going on that made you?
Yeah, I was playing tight.
Yet?
I was playing tightly, and Sit and Go's the goal to some extent is to get in the money because the payout structure is first place gets 5 buy-ins, second gets 3, third gets 2, everyone else gets nothing. Yeah. Whereas in a tournament, it's like first place gets 100, second gets 50, third gets 25, and then everybody else gets nothing, kind of. It's not exactly like that, but I was getting a lot of min cashes, but cashing for the minimum is not good. If you're cashing for the minimum, let's say 20% of the time, but then just losing immediately, you are not going to make any money.
Yeah.
A while back, Dale Negreanu put out this poker player. He put out this, it's not really a study, but we'll call it a study, where he looked at players who had played a decent amount of tournaments, and some of the biggest losers were the players who had the highest cash percentage because they were getting in the money a lot, but they never had a big stack. So they would 1.5x or 2x their money a lot, but they would almost never 100x their money. Yeah. And if you look at the best online players, a lot of them cash. So they pay roughly 15% of the field in poker tournaments today. And a lot of the best players cash 15%, 14%, 13%. So like less than you would think you should. But when they do get in the money, they have a giant stack and they take they make the final table way more often than other players.
Makes sense. So how did that happen for you? Obviously had a rough World Series. You went back home, made some adjustments. How did that go from that transition then to winning your first WPT at the Mirage?
I don't really remember how any sort of transition went. I started talking a lot with 2 guys, Dave Benefield and Tom Dwan. They were both very instrumental in helping me get very good at poker. They're excellent at poker. Yeah. And I ended up taking 5th place in the Bahamas in January when I was, I guess, 22. And I cashed for something like $320,000, which was a good cash. I mean, it won back everything I lost the first year and then some. But I kind of thought that was going to be like my one shot to actually win a big tournament. And I did not play especially well at the final table. I thought everyone was going to try to bluff me, and they just weren't. Because there was a bunch of young online kids. I'm like, okay, young online kids bluff a lot. It turns out they don't do that a lot when there's $1.5 million on the line. They get their act together. So I was kind of bummed about that because there were something like 1,000 players in that tournament, and I took 5th, and it's hard to do. I realized that's lucky, and fortunately, I just showed up, continued playing, and then won a tournament shortly after for $1 million at Mirage, and that was also lucky, good and lucky. I say things are lucky a lot. I think that turns off some people or makes some people mad, but look, you got to run hot. That's how it goes. Yeah. You don't have to run hot. I mean, look, at the end of the day, to win at poker, you only have to do 3 things. You have to find a game you can beat. Then you have to play that game a lot. And then you have to keep a proper bankroll. And if you do those 3 things, you will definitively win. And if you do not do those 3 things, you will maybe win, but probably lose. Most people
probably with everything, though, that's the case. Obviously,
yeah, find where you have an edge. Find where you have an edge and do it over and over and over again.
I want to revisit one thing because I saw a video. I think it might be your main video on your YouTube page, where you speak about how, because you had just mentioned that again, where you thought that people were going to be bluffing a lot and they're not. That was the same on that video. You were talking about people are not taking those. I think you called it playing more aggressive style, and then bluffing a little more often is something that people don't do as much as you thought that they would be.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to know. I mean, look, this was many, many years ago. I can barely remember yesterday. But I know at the final table there were multiple very, very strong online players. One of the guys, this guy named Isaac Haxon, who's one of the biggest winners at poker now. And he actually did run like this most insane bluff you've ever seen at the final table. Not against me, but against someone else. So maybe they just weren't bluffing me, or maybe I picked the wrong ones who I thought would be bluffing, or I thought everyone would be bluffing. Look, people bluff. That's part of the game. And as your opponents get better and better, they will naturally find bluffs and play aggressively.
So you mentioned that your parents weren't so happy with you playing Magic the Gathering. What was the conversation like once you knew that poker was something that you were going to pursue?
So I played a lot of poker, call it in my spare time. I was going to college. I was working at an airport, at a job at a comic book store, and I had a little bit of spare time. So I was playing in all of my spare time. And I don't think they knew how well I was doing for a long time because I put $50 in one time and didn't really talk to them about it. I did not withdraw any money. All that $300,000 I just left online because I was a young, dumb kid. Probably shouldn't have done that. That was risky. But I didn't need money for anything. I had a job that paid my almost non-existent expenses. And eventually I told them that I'm going to quit my job at the airport because I am making way more money playing poker. And they're like, oh, how much money are you making playing poker? And I was making like $300 an hour, which is good money for an 18-year-old kid. And right. They're like, okay, are you just getting lucky? And I showed them, I had a notebook where I would keep track of every tournament that I played and how I did in it. And I was winning every month very consistently, and I was winning every week almost. So it was very clear that I was winning over the course of like a year and a half. And I quit the job at the airport. And then about a month later, I'm like, look, I got to quit college too. It's not worth it. And that made them sad. But at the same time, the alternative was go to college for another year and a half and get a degree that I'm probably not going to use. And even if I do go get a job, it's probably not going to be making $300 an hour. And it was a situation where I recognized the fortunate timing, the fortunate spot I was in. And if you look at a lot of the best poker players in the world today, they are all roughly my age. And that's because they were all in a similar spot where they had no real commitments. Like they didn't have a family to take care of or anything like that. They didn't have a career, and they had a lot of free time. And this opportunity to make a ton of money fell right in their lap. And we took advantage of it, right? And then once poker did start to get a little bit tougher, we had big bankrolls at that point that allowed us to weather whatever storms came at us. Because like me with the Sit and Goes, right? When the Sit and Goes died, I was lucky that I already won a ton of money, because imagine I had won $50K instead of $350K and I just lost it. I maybe would have been out of poker. But instead I won $350 and lost 100 something of it, and it was okay. But the fact that I found myself in that spot where I decided to quit my job and quit college and grind it out and get that bankroll that will let me withstand whatever comes was very, very valuable. And with a lot of things in investing, like the opportunity only lasts for a short window, and you got to be there and be willing to go for it.
You seem very methodical when it comes to your bankroll management. Obviously, that's a skill. Is that something that came natural for you to understand that? How did that come about?
So we were always like frugal as a family, and we didn't spend money too freely. And I think that taught me the value of money back in the day. Sounds bad because like now I don't care about money at all. It's like whatever. Now it's just like a tool to get the job done. But so I was always very, very cautious with my bankroll. And I still am cautious with my bankroll today, because I realize that if I lose it, that's not good. And if you're out of action, you have no opportunities or fewer opportunities to continue making money. So I would like whenever I was playing the Sit and Goes, I never cashed out any of the money, because I realized if I cashed it out and spent it on stuff, I can't use it to move up in stakes. And I knew I wanted to go play live poker and play bigger buy-in games, or I needed maybe $1 million bankroll or something like that, and I didn't have anywhere near it yet. So I recognized the amount of variance in poker very early, but just from studying and observing variance. And really, if you set systems in place and the systems are right, and then you follow the systems, it's kind of hard to fail. And what a lot of people do wrong is they're gambling. They see a game they want to play and they play, and they don't really worry about the fact that this may impact their potential to make money in the near future and foreseeable future.
So how many hours a week are you putting towards poker nowadays?
Actually playing poker, I play roughly 10 days per month now, give or take. I'm home in New York City most of the time, and then I'll travel to Las Vegas a decent amount. And they have some tournaments in Florida and in the Bahamas currently, since COVID happened. They are starting a lot of other tournament series around the world, but I have not made my way out to them yet. But I usually travel for about 10 days per month on average. You know, sometimes more, sometimes.
So does your family stay in New York?
Family stays in New York. They go to school. My wife has a job, so they have their life here, and I go and play cards.
Do you ever go up to Canada to play online, or do you usually just play live when you play?
I'm almost entirely playing live at this point. I used to play a ton online, but the online games are tough now. I mean, simple as that. There's various issues with online where people now have, some people have bots. People are worried about people colluding and all sorts of stuff, to where it's not worth the effort to get up and fly somewhere and sit in a hotel room for a week and play games that are abnormally tough, when I could go to Las Vegas and play in a much nicer environment and hang out with friends and
have
bigger buy-ins that are softer.
Yeah.
I mean, the big advantage to online poker over live poker is that you can play way more tournaments in a short period of time. Like when I would be playing Sit and Goes a long time ago, I'd play 16 of them at a time and play 200 of them in a day. Whereas when you play live poker, you can play one tournament in a day, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 if you can ranter. So it's not nearly as much volume playing live, which means that you will have losing years playing live poker. Well, in tournaments at least. And that's normal. And if you ask any tournament pro, they'll all tell you they've had losing years. Everybody has. And as long as you're cool with that, it's okay. A lot of people are not cool with that. Something that makes it easier is having a business on the side that makes money and pays the bills. And that's something, unfortunately, a lot of poker players haven't figured out yet. But having stable income is very nice, especially when another chunk of your income is based on something that's very high variance. I mean, I'll give you an example. I've been starting to ramp up my play a little bit more in the Poker Go studio in Las Vegas, where I just won those 2 tournaments, and I won another one in December. So kind of 3 back to back to back.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But before that, I had taken a bunch of like 5th to 7th places, and people were like, "Oh, he must be bad at poker. He doesn't win ever." And I was down 200K or something. And then this last month I've cashed for 800, right? So it's how it goes. It's just variance. And as long as you're cool with it, it's fine. But I think a lot of people get really wrapped up in the short term, and they think that what happened yesterday matters. But in reality, you just show up and you extract your edge and you collect it when you collect it, which may be in the next tournament, or it may be many, many, many years from now.
We hope you're enjoying today's episode as much as we loved creating it for you. And speaking of creating content, producing this podcast takes time, effort, and resources. We invest our heart and soul into bringing you valuable and entertaining episodes week after week. If you've been enjoying our show and would like to show your support, we have a fantastic way for you to do so. You can now support the show by making a small contribution through our Support the Show link. It's really easy. Just click on the Support the Show link in the show notes section, and it takes you right to our donation page. By donating, you'll be helping us cover various production costs, upgrading our equipment, and securing amazing guests for future episodes. Every little bit helps us tremendously in elevating the quality of our content. The platform is a user-friendly website where you can contribute easily. Plus, it's a fun way for us to connect with you and show our gratitude directly. We'll be sending some exclusive bonus content, behind-the-scenes footage, and special shout-outs to our supporters. So if you appreciate what we do and want to be part of this amazing journey, consider buying us a virtual cup of coffee or 2. Your support means the world to us. Together, we can make this podcast even better and continue delivering top-notch episodes for your enjoyment. We appreciate you for listening and thank you in advance for your support. Now, back to the episode. Are you pretty good at that emotional aspect when you're down? It's just part of it, a temporary dip, or have there been times when you're like, oh, guess I gotta hang it up?
After a while, I just stopped caring about money to some extent, and you realize that you're going to play and you're going to lose sometimes, and it's one tournament, and one tournament is not relevant, right? And even if you lose 40 tournaments in a row, it's not relevant. I mean, again, if you ask every good poker player who's played the World Series of Poker every summer, where they play 40 tournaments or so, they've almost all had a summer with 1 or no cashes at all. They just lose them all. I've had them, so has everybody else. And that's discouraging. I mean, I was actually very fortunate. I've had 2 very bad summers at the World Series of Poker, but on the end of both of them, I won $1 million in a tournament right afterwards. So this is how it goes, right? I mean, you show up, you play. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I remember one summer I would play like 7 hours each day, and then I would just get it all in with ace king or a pair of queens or something, lose the all in and go home. And it happened every day for 40 days. And like, all right, you recognize like the site's not rigged. You're not being cheated. You're not unlucky. God's not conspiring against you. None of this. This is just variance. It's important to know what you sign up for.
It's one thing I respect about you, just how you treat every hand independently, and you don't get 2 up or 2 down. With your wins or with your losses, you just understand.
Yeah,
Can't be emotional, right?
That could be good and bad. I mean, I think if you don't experience the highs and enjoy it, that may make you not care so much about it in general. But if you get devastated every time you lose, especially in tournaments where you're usually going to lose because only 15% of the people get in the money, you're going to be sad a lot of the time. So you see a lot of poker players who are often sad or dejected and because they've lost 15 tournaments in a row. But like that's normal. Get used to it. And once you realize that this is standard, and even if you're in the worst run of your life, it's still standard. It's going to happen. You stop worrying about it so much. It's important to focus on things you can control, which is like getting better at poker, making sure you're showing up ready to play in a good mindset, et cetera, and not focusing on things like I lost my last 50-50 all in.
Yeah.
Can't do anything about it.
Can't stay in the past, yeah.
Yeah, you portray yourself in a very humble way. Obviously, I hope you do celebrate your victories, but you never come off too full of yourself. And that's one thing that I like, with your content. You know that you're always learning and trying to get to another level.
Yeah, I think there are, if you look at a lot of the best poker players, they come from one of two mindsets. One of the mindsets is more like mine, where maybe they have, I don't know, like maybe they think they're not as good as perhaps they are to some extent, because I recognize I'm not the best poker player in the world. I have a lot to learn, and everybody has a lot to learn, because I get to play with a lot of the best poker players, and I look at some of what they do, and they make mistakes, right? We all make mistakes. So given that, I view it as like my job is to just always try to become the best version of myself within reason, within constraints, right? Like if you have a wife and kids at home, you can't be playing poker and studying poker all day, every day. Like people without that can't. So I realize I'm never going to be the best poker player in the world because I have constraints, which is fine. So I have to work within my constraints to be the best I can be. Other people come from the mindset of, look how good I am. I'm so good. I'm the best player. You all are worse than me. I'm going to crush you all. I'm so cool. And some of those people make it to the top, right? It's like the exact opposite of my mindset. But I think if you look at a lot of the absolute best players, a lot of them are generally confident in their skills, and their skills are very good. But at the same time, they have a learner mentality. They're always trying to learn new things, not necessarily about poker, but about everything. They're trying to learn new things and improve themselves.
You want to go to another level.
Well, more importantly, you don't want to fall behind. A big issue in poker is that the tools to study the game get better and better, and the information gets better and better, and people are always working hard to improve. And if they're working harder than you, you will, to some extent, naturally fall behind. I mean, this happened to a lot of players in like 2006 or 2007 when, after Party Poker closed, like we talked about earlier, where the games all of a sudden got much tougher. A lot of people who were winning a lot of money just started breaking even or losing, and they didn't know why. But the answer is a lot of the players who were really bad quit, and now you're playing against better people, so you have to get better. And all those people were devoting their whole life to getting good at poker, so it makes it very hard to keep up. I mean, this is one of the reasons I made my poker training site and hired a lot of the best poker players in the world who are much better than me to make content for my site, because I want to learn from them. And if I can share that with other people, it's even better. So even though I don't have my entire life to devote to poker now, I get a lot of the best information almost spoon-fed to me by the coaches on my site, and that allows me to skip a lot of the, I won't call it wasted time, the time that it takes to actually go through the grinding and the effort to learn new things. They just tell me. So it fast tracks me to let me stay at or near the top.
Do you have any type of I know athletes do a system basically before like a big game and things like that for a bigger tournament? Do you have certain things that you do, music that you listen to, any type of thing like that, a routine?
I am probably one of the worst at this. My routine is I roll out of bed as late as I possibly can before the tournament. Ideally, if the tournament starts at noon, if I'm staying at the casino, I might wake up at 11:15 or so. Then I'll have some coffee, do some light workout, take a shower, take care of whatever business work I have, and go play poker. And I think that's just because I'm at this point in my life where it's going to sound bad, but I don't care that much about if I win or lose. And I mean, I care, but at the same time, I realize a lot of it's just purely out of my control. So my job is to show up awake and thinking clearly enough. And I can do that by having almost no, call it pregame routine. And I know that I personally start to fall apart when I'm really tired. So if you have to play till 3 a.m., I want to make sure that I'm playing my best at 3 a.m. I don't really care about playing my best on the first hand because the first hand matters, but the 3 a.m. hands when you're playing for a ton of money really matter. And so I want to make sure that I have set up myself to be the best in that situation. And I'm usually pretty good until 6 a.m. or so. And you never have to play till 6 a.m. anymore. So I'm usually pretty well focused in the middle and the late stages of the day. And some people are not. And I think the fact that I don't wake up very early and have a long routine allows me to do that. I mean, poker is a very different game than things like a basketball game or a football game where you play for 2 hours and you're done.
And you're intense, right? Just during that time, and then you're done, right?
Yeah. And in poker, it's like a lot of things not happening. You just kind of sit around waiting, and then all of a sudden you have to be on and you have to make a very good decision for a lot of money. But it takes place over the course of a 14 or 16 hour day. And it's I think it's a very different type of mindset required for those two things. Interestingly enough, Magic the Gathering tournaments are very similar to this. You would play 12-hour Magic the Gathering tournaments where you have to sit there and make decisions over and over and over again. And a lot of the best poker players came from Magic the Gathering, where they were trained to do this when they were 12 years old. And it becomes natural to some extent. That said, most people have horrible mindset issues. They need to figure out all the things that are going on. They need to calm themselves. They need to get all the nonsense off their plate so that they can purely focus on poker. Mindset's super important. And I think it's something that it takes a long time to realize what matters and what does not matter. But eventually realize a lot of stuff does not matter. And just your job is to show up and play good cards.
Yeah, I watched your
job
stream.
is to show up and play well. I mean, play good cards in my mind. He plays a good strategy. Yeah, play good cards.
I watched your final table stream with some of your hands. You seem super relaxed. You seem like you're having a good time, right? How long were those final tables roughly for those Poker Go tournaments?
The Poker Go final tables are relatively short. They last maybe 7 hours or so, 6 hours, something like that. I mean, that's relatively short. I used to wear sunglasses and a hoodie, and I would not talk to anyone, and I was a young, angry, mad kid before I recognized all these things. Because, I was doing only okay at poker. I would get unlucky. I'd be annoyed. I'd be mad, like everybody else. And at some point, a switch must have flipped. I mean, my dad used to always tell me, attitude is everything. And I had a bad attitude as a kid and as a young adult. And eventually, I don't know what happened. I got a good attitude. I got rid of the hoodie and the sunglasses. I started talking to people and making good connections and having fun. And it turns out, even if you do play slightly less focused poker having fun, you make a whole lot of connections. And so many good things have just fallen in my lap in life because I have a good time and I interact with people and I add value as opposed to 100% trying to make the best decision. Now, if I'm sitting there playing a hand, I'm obviously trying my absolute best, right? But there's a lot of value in enjoying yourself and letting other people enjoy themselves. And that's good for poker and business at the end of the day, I think. And I try to do that today.
That way.
Say that one more time.
Expand your world that way. It's harder to be a Lone Ranger in a way.
Definitely. I mean, people want to work with me, right? Whereas if I was mean and didn't talk to anyone, no one would want to work with me. And that's very beneficial.
Yeah, I noticed in one of your hands, you definitely had alarm bells come off right when Dan Shack raised you and you're in the big blind. You picked up, it was a betting tell that you picked up. Obviously, that he was, with his stack size, you knew that he was trying to entice you in there.
There was a hand. I know which one you're talking about because I made a video about it recently where I'm like, oh my God, look at my face. Normally, I don't have any facial expressions when I'm playing. But it folded around to him in the small blind and he raised, I think, 2.5 big blinds, which is not a good play from the small blind because the big player in the big blind only has to call 1.5 big blinds more to try to win 6, which means they only need to realize 25% equity in position, which any 2 cards will do against a normal range of hands, which means he's probably super duper strong. And turns out he was. He had pocket queens. And that allowed me to not play a hand aggressively, whereas perhaps I normally would have. But to be fair, that was like an easy thing to pick up on because the bet size was so abnormal. Whenever you're talking to people at the table or not paying such great attention, maybe you miss the way someone puts their chips in the pot, and maybe they put their chips in the pot slightly differently if they're weak or strong, or maybe they blink a little funny, or maybe they look at their cards half a second instead of 2 seconds, whatever. You miss some small stuff, or you don't pick up on it to begin with. But I think it is worth giving up on those things, given a lot of those things you don't even necessarily know what they mean, in exchange for interacting with people and making good connections.
Yeah, I'm sure in cash games you're playing extended hours with the same player, so you're going to start picking things up. Comes to physical or betting tells. In tournaments, you're obviously being shuffled around a lot.
Yeah, so in tournaments, you do move to different tables very frequently. However, I think most good players keep some sort of data on the opponents they play with, where they have a list of tells that they think everyone has, and they have a list of tendencies that everyone has, either in their head or in a note file. I mean, I keep a note file of everyone I play with, if they do anything that I think is absurd. And that's because my memory's bad, right? So again, if you know your memory's bad, write stuff down. So I write down a lot of stuff. Whenever I'm playing, I write down all the relevant hands that I play so that I can review them later after the tournament. And I make a list of questions I have during hands that I want to make sure I'm looking up and trying to figure out so that you study, right? I mean, if you just sit there and play, maybe you'll learn something, but it turns out having a computer that'll tell you if it's good or bad is pretty beneficial.
So how much time are you putting into your business? And we know how much time you're playing poker every month, but obviously you've authored, what, 14 books?
Maybe 15 or 16 now.
15 or 16 now, yeah?
Yes, I've written a lot of books. The books, to some extent, are to give people guides to how to play the game and also tastes of what I offer at my training site, pokercoaching.com. And I'm in my office working like Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. till 6, or from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. every day. So, what's that? I don't even know how many hours that is. 50-hour week, something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm grinding hard. I'm not goofing off. I'm very good at being efficient. I think a lot of people see that I make so much content, but I'm just like super efficient with it. And I try to do things whenever I want to be doing them. So I have a lot of different tasks, right? Like, so I'll write books and make articles and make videos, review people's content, talk to people, schedule stuff, right? And so I try to do whatever I want to do. I always have a decently long to-do list, and I'll wake up and I'll look at the to-do list and I'll think, oh, let me do that one today. That one seems like fun. And then I'll do that. And then I'll be done with it. And then the next day I'll do something different. And a month later, I'll probably have to do the same thing over again. And it essentially lets me stay relatively fresh and passionate about whatever I'm doing, which I think comes out in the end product, as opposed to something that I feel like I have to do because it's a job.
Yeah. So do you think better living in a state where you aren't really talking about your tournaments always, you're kind of going to Florida and the Bahamas and Las Vegas, not interested in living in like Las Vegas and being closer to or these tournaments?
So after COVID happened, the live poker tournament scene kind of got shook up to where it was not clear where a lot of poker would be taking place. For a while, it looked like Florida in Fort Lauderdale area might be the place, or Los Angeles, or Las Vegas. And it turns out most of the tournaments that I am interested in playing are happening in Las Vegas. They have the Poker Go studio there, which is sort of like a TV set where they play poker tournaments and they stream the final tables on TV, and then they make very good productions there. And the buy-ins are good. The place is nice. So I actually just rented an apartment in Vegas for a year because I am going to end up being out there so much. But it was not clear where I needed to be. That said, my wife works in New York City. She's not moving. Her parents are here. So it's not really up to me.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah, if you had her family there. So that definitely gives you guys a lot of support because you have 2 sons now, right?
Yeah, it gives us support as well. Her parents help take care of the kids sometimes. And she works here. So, look, I can, to some extent, work from anywhere. I will say it's actually nice having some separation from poker because whenever I go to travel to play poker, I don't really do much for the business at all. I kind of neglect it completely. And then whenever I'm at home, I neglect poker completely.
Yeah.
And it again goes back to the idea of making sure I'm staying fresh because playing poker all day, every day is not fun. And doing business stuff all day, every day is not fun. But doing it half the time is great. And so it's almost like I have 2 part-time jobs that I love.
Yeah, you're not going to get burned out with that system, right? It seems like
I mean, the tough thing about being in Vegas is that there's like always some tournament you could be playing.
Yeah.
And you can literally play every day. And I mean, knowing me, or at least past Jonathan Little, I used to live in Vegas for 5 years. I would play every single day. I would go to Bellagio and play poker 14 hours a day, every day. And I was fine with it. I loved it, but I had no life and I had no relationships and I had a lot of money, but that was about it. And that's not good at the end of the day.
So that was about the time when you started thinking about the next stage of your life?
That was roughly during that period of time. Yeah, I mean, I sat and I played at Bellagio pretty much every day, 5, 10, or 10, 20 no limit for about a year and a half, which is, not all that long, but it was a good game and I could make great money. But again, it was a grind. I didn't love sitting there doing it all day. And I mean, look, I'm someone who can't sit down and do work for a long period of time. Like whenever I write a book, I'll usually just sit down and write the book in 3 weeks, but I'll put in 12-hour days for 3 weeks and then I'll be done with it. But so I don't mind grinding, but at the same time, it's bad for life balance. And if you have other stuff happening in life, like any sort of relationships, you need at least some amount of life balance. The other problem people have in Vegas is that once they decide, all right, I need some life balance, then they usually go off the deep end and they go to fancy dinners and to the club and they do that all day, every day. And next thing you know, they have no money.
A lot of distractions.
Vegas is hard.
And then when you go to write a book, you said you can do it and just get it out in 3 weeks. Do you know what you're going to be writing it about? Or you're like, oh, that's my next book. Does it happen over the course of writing it?
I usually have some clear idea of what is missing in the poker book market. And I'm usually trying to find that or something in the poker book market that's bad that I could do better. So what I'll do is I will have a topic, let's say poker tournaments. I'm going to write a book about how to play poker tournaments. And then I'll make an outline for everything I think you could possibly need to know about playing poker tournaments. So we'll have pre-flop poker, post-flop poker, stuff away from the felt. Okay. Then we break down pre-flop poker. So whenever they deal the first two cards, what do you do? Well, do you raise before the flop? Do you call before the flop? What do you raise with when they fold to you? Okay, we got to write about that. What if somebody raises in front of you? Okay, we got to write about that. What if you raise and someone re-raises? We got to write about that. So I'll just go through all the iterations of what could happen. And I'll do that for all scenarios that could come up in this game. And then I write it out. And, I'll have a bunch of bullet points, and each bullet point will end up being 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pages each. And then you have a book. I recently just wrote a book that was 100 Essential Tips to Master No Limit Hold'em, which is 100 Essential Tips to Master No Limit Hold'em. It's basically 100 3 or 4 page articles on specific topics that are organized logically. So, you probably should start at the beginning, but it's designed so you can sit down and read for 5 minutes and learn something. But again, that just started off as 100 lines, right? And then the 100 lines became 500 pages. So I fill in the blanks. I make an outline, fill in the blanks, easy.
Did you have any projects on the horizon that you're thinking about, or will you just come across maybe a deficiency in the market when it comes to, it'll just kind of come to you organically when you're playing or something of a topic of a book?
I don't know if look, every time I finish a book, I'm like, I don't know if I'm writing more books anytime soon because it's a bit of a grind, and I got plenty of them already. But no, there's always projects in the work. A lot of them are secret. So there's nothing I can talk about right now. Unfortunately, I'm working on a very big change on pokercoaching.com, but
that's great.
That'll be coming soon, hopefully.
So what do you have on the horizon? You're playing the Wynn Classic next week, correct? Is that your next poker play?
You know everything about me. Yeah, I'm going to play the Wynn Classic. I'm going to play the Wynn in, I think I leave Sunday. So I'll be there for about 2 weeks. And then after that, there is another tournament at the Poker Go studio. It's the US Poker Open or something like that. And then is the World Series of Poker. So 3 Vegas trips back to back to back.
How much time will you be here in the summer, do you think, for the World Series?
I do not know yet. So previously, I would spend maybe 2 weeks at the beginning of the World Series of Poker, then 2 weeks at the end. Last year, I didn't go until the last 2 weeks because the schedule was just not good for people who wanted to play $5,000 to $25,000 buy-in tournaments, because every tournament of that buy-in was spread out like 4 or 5 days apart. So if I went for 2 weeks, I'd only be able to play 4 tournaments that I actually wanted to play, which is very different than when I go play at the Poker Go studio, where you can play 12 tournaments in 2 weeks that are all exactly what you want to play in a nice environment. So logistically, it just did not make sense to go. So I just went for the main event to the end. This year, I'm in this weird spot where I'm kind of like in the running for Poker Player of the Year already. I know it's early in the year. It's only March. But that would be good to win. And in order to win that, you definitely need to put in volume. And my biggest problem with any sort of Player of the Year race is that I just don't put in the volume that other people play because they're playing all the time and I'm playing a third of the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, I mean, right now I'm like number 5 or 6 or 7 or something. So I'm at least live. And if I do well at the Win, and then if I do well in April, then I'll probably be very live. And if I'm very live, I probably need to go to much longer in the summer to try to make that happen.
So do you think they spread them out like that so people will stay in Vegas longer?
I don't know. I don't know how they go about scheduling the World Series of Poker. I think they think most No Limit Hold'em players will just play whatever's happening, and I don't think they view a $1,500 tournament all that different from a $10,000 tournament. But the $1,500 tournaments are very, very... A lot of players play them, right? They'll have 2,000 people in them, whereas a $10,000 buy-in tournament may have 500 people in them, and it's a whole lot easier to win a 500-person tournament than a 2,000-person tournament. And you get to invest more money in the $10,000 tournaments, even though your edge is going to be smaller because the field's smaller and the opponents are better. But I don't know. It's hard for me to get out of bed to go play a tournament if I think I'm going to make like $300 on average playing it or $400 per average playing it, when I could just schedule my life differently and make $1,500 or $2,000 on average. If you're new to poker, check out pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. That is a free 3-hour-long crash course that will teach you to beat your friends.
Yeah, that's what most people are playing poker for, right? There's a lot of time that has to go into obviously playing at your level.
Yeah, I mean, to get really good at anything takes a whole lot of time. I mean, if you want to become a brain surgeon, you don't just go start cutting people's heads open. You know, you go to school for a very long time. You practice on dead people. You practice on animals. Is that bad? Is that even allowed anymore? It's probably not allowed.
Frogs
before you start cutting open humans' heads, you got to do a lot of work and a lot of study. But for some reason, people think that they can go play poker and be very good at it. And that's crazy. You need to study, you need to work hard. So check out pokercoaching.com/fundamentals and get started.
Yeah, we appreciate having you on here, Jonathan. It was a true pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Having said that, if you haven't done so already, we are now accepting enrollments for Level Up Goal, our accountability program designed to support you in achieving your next goal. We've dedicated a significant amount of time and effort to create this program and will continue refining to ensure you receive massive value throughout your journey. Enrollment is currently available for a limited time. Here is the process to enroll and get started. Simply go to levelupgoal.com or click on the link in the description that takes you to the website where you can sign up and be a part of the coolest crew in town. Get in early because we are capping the amount of enrollment opportunities available, of course. For more stories and lessons, check out some of my other episodes in the series. Thank you for showing up and be well.